In a recent video, I talked about my desire to move away from shooting the same old landscapes, going to the same locations, expecting amazing results each time. Now, as part of this, I thought I would reinvestigate my local woodland, which is 5 minutes drive away. Gives me ample opportunities to get out in different conditions and shoot all sorts of different scenery using different cameras. Now, I've made 2 or 3 trips into the forest in the last fortnight, and this is the first one. Now, I'm not totally bowled over by these images. I really enjoyed the morning. I wandered around, it was lovely and calm, very still, no rain. And I enjoyed the trip, but the photographs I think are a bit lacking. Now, that's not surprising because this is my first visit to the woodland area for probably 6 to 12 months. And you can't suddenly switch to an area and expect to get great results. It takes a time to adjust and also start to see compositions. And woodland is probably, I would say, the most difficult type of landscape photography to shoot successfully, that is. Anyone can take a picture. So anyway, let's have a look at the video, see what you think of the images. It's the start of a number of videos where I explore my woodland using various different cameras. And yeah, hopefully more of this to come. Now, I like to shoot in the big landscapes, in the mountains, huge vistas and spectacular views. First thing in the morning, bright light, all those wonderful things that landscape photographers aspire towards. But there are times when you just can't get out to those locations, or you may be a bit tired of the drive and of chasing those big views and being disappointed. So today I've come down to a bit of local woodland and I am just going to make the most of the quieter location. Now, one of the nicest things about shooting in woodland like this, it could be absolutely anywhere. I mean, there's no massive views, there's no iconic shots, but it's changing all the time. And that's what you get in these small locations. It's never the same twice. And also, the weather is very dull today. It's going to be raining. It's just held off at the moment. So it's not particularly spectacular, but that does bring out the lushness of the forest. It makes it a lot easier to shoot. The dynamic range is much smaller, and the colours are enhanced as well. So it's close to home, makes a change, and it's relatively easy to shoot too. Now, I've already spotted something I quite like the look of, and I'm being careful here because I'm standing in about 3 feet of ferns underneath me. The view behind me is very appealing because I have a stillness to the morning. It's only half an hour after sunrise and I have a beautiful reflection of the trees, but I'm really interested in that vegetation, so I don't want the whole tree in there, so I'll probably crop in quite a little bit, but the biggest challenge is going to be setting up in this rather uneven terrain. Okay, so I've made my exposure now of the scene you can see just over my left shoulder. I'll just take you through the settings I've got on the camera. Okay, so I've set the camera up fairly low, and in amongst all this bracken it's very difficult to get it stable. You just can't get it stable, to be honest, so you have to be very careful when releasing the shutter. Now, I've got a composition set up, if I can just show you here, of a fairly tight cropping on the trees. Now, I've achieved that by using not only my standard lens but a 1.4 times converter. Now, it's difficult with prime lenses to get exactly the right focal length, but the 150mm is too long, the 80mm was too short, so I just threw in that 1.4 times converter, which made it a lot easier to get the framing right. Using f11 because there's nothing in the foreground. Yeah, very calm scene. Shooting with Kodak Ektar, which is obviously a super saturated colour negative film, and I've taken 2 frames, 1 second and 2 seconds. I'll be honest, I really enjoyed that very simple, straightforward composition. The ease of shooting, the fact that it was 20 yards from the car, makes it very enjoyable being out this morning, and it's not actually raining, so I am making the most of it. Now, it would be lovely if you could just change up your background and get some massive dramatic location Well, yeah, this would be ideal if I could get a view like this every time, but sadly back to reality. So we have to work with what we've got. And what I've got is actually very nice this morning. It's actually better than I thought it would be, and I'm feeling very enthusiastic after that first image. So we're onward and upward. Now I have come across a very, very quiet, subtle, understated scene in the woods here. I even feel like whispering because I don't want to disturb the calm, but it's all in shade. It's very, very dark. I'm having to use long exposures. I've got my Bronica set up with the 50mm, that's the wide angle lens on there, and I've stopped it down to f16. Now I would use f22, but this lens is very poor at f22 following some tests I did, and I'm probably going to start using the 40mm Xenon lens because that's a much better performer at the smaller apertures. Anyway, back to the point of the shot. What I have behind me is a little meandering line running through the little bit of the woods here, and I've got an arrangement of trees. Now I've had to line those trees up carefully because I don't want them to overlap, but I also want the eye to follow through and go to the back of the scene. But ultimately it's the front of the scene where the interest is, and I have a beautiful fern in the foreground in the middle area, which is just turning in colour, so that's the central point for your eye to go to. Well, with it being so dark here in this small clearing early in the morning, and with me using a 100 speed Ektar film, I'm having to go for a very long exposure, not by choice. Now I've gone for 8 seconds and 16 seconds, even though my meter reading would indicate that about 4 seconds is correct. Now the reason I've gone for the longer exposures is that Ektar has a bit of reciprocity failure, and it needs a bit more exposure just to compensate for the slow shutter speed. So rather than just give it a little bit more, I'm giving it an extra stop there, and the extra exposure at 16 seconds is 2 stops. Now that is not going to harm colour negative film whatsoever. The colour negative film, and with such a large piece of film, is going to be able to cope with that absolutely fine. And I'll even lay a bet that the overexposure will make it a better shot because I'll have more shadow detail to play with. Now something that may be of interest to you, it may not be, is how I view things, how I view the world. I tend to view the world photographically through the angle of view of a standard lens. Now that equates to the usual sort of 45mm in full frame terms. It's about 80mm in my Bronica, and I tend to wander around previewing in that format, and I use the little app I've shown you before. Now this is the Artist Viewfinder Mark II. I've got no affiliation with them, I'm not plugging it, I'm just saying this is what I use. And it allows me to put frame lines up for my focal lengths on my Bronica camera. I'll be absolutely honest, I would not be able to make the film images I do without a preview app, without a electronic aid. It's made it so much easier than the old days when you had to basically take a guess sometimes at what it would come out like. But this has made life a lot easier for me, and I like the angle of view of the standard lens. I just find it very pleasing. It's not dragging your eye around like a wide angle. I do like short telephotos as well, but I begin the whole preview process with that standard field of view. Well, I've spotted something. I have spotted something behind me. I played about with the preview device, so I'm not taking my bag off yet because I'm not quite sure how I'm going to shoot this, and until I know, I won't take my bag off because it's time setting up, etc. But I think if I go for either an 80mm or a 150, or maybe in between, I might use that teleconverter again and just give me a mid-focal length. It's just got beautiful colour, beautiful subtlety to it, so I spent about 20 minutes I think trying to work this composition out. Okay, I have resolved my composition. I played about with the wide angle, the standard lens, and I came back to the standard. Now, the reason is I didn't like the amount of foreground that the wide angle included. I could have cropped it out later, but I want to keep the square crop, so the 80mm gives me just enough. I would have liked something like about a 70mm, but I haven't got one. So I've had to compromise slightly on which trees I include in the composition. That said, I'm very happy that there's no sky in there, so it's probably just about right. The balance is okay. Shot with Ektar, shot at f11. There's not too much of a problem with depth of field. Biased towards the background. If some of those ferns in the bottom of the frame are slightly soft, I'm not that bothered. And yes, 1/4 second and 1/2 second. 2 frames again. One is a safety shot with an extra exposure, just in case one of them doesn't come out right, get damage on the negative, etc. Now, in addition to shooting with the Ektar, using the last frames of my roll, I've also loaded up some Rollei Infrared 400. Now, you don't have to shoot infrared film as infrared. You can use it with normal black and white filters or no filter at all. I've shot this with a yellow filter to start with, and then I have flipped over to using an R72 infrared, and I've used 2 seconds, 4 seconds and 8 seconds at f11 to just see if I can get a bit of a glow into that foliage. Now this image caught my eye because of the colour, the brown of the ferns that have turned, and they're very uniform, and they're quite bright actually, even though it's overcast, because they're reflecting quite a lot of light. And I've used my widest lens to make obviously a square crop encompassing a frame full of these ferns. The idea being it will be a sort of riot of detail. Now it's not all going to be super sharp because I've used f16. With a medium format camera at this distance there will be some problems getting this sort of depth of focus, depth of field, sorry, into the shot. But if some of them go soft, I don't really mind. Yeah, I've used the Rollei Infrared black and white, by the way. I wanted to capture this as a quite graphic image. Colour, yeah, it would have been quite nice in colour, but it is very monochromatic. And on a more practical note, I have finished my roll of Ektar and I don't want to load another one. Well, that is me pretty much for the morning. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a remarkably calm morning. I felt very relaxed, taking my time, not rushed at all. And I think that's made it made better photography, to be honest, because there wasn't the big dramatic scenes. It was all very, very low key, very enjoyable though. And I think the fact I've got a little bit of colour in the landscape now has helped greatly. So anyway, thank you as ever for coming along, and I will see you again on the next trip.